It's time for this morning's View from the Hill. And to get it, we're pleased to be joined by Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. He's the chairman, the new chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Ron, congratulations on your chairmanship. Welcome back to America's Forum.
Morning, JD. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, sir. And it is a troubling new year in some respects. We saw the attacks in Paris. We're wondering what is happening domestically. What are you hearing? Are there any imminent threats? Has there been a pickup in chatter? Tell us about what you've heard.
I've not heard of any increased activity, but let's face it, JD, this is a threat. And it is a threat that I think for far too long this administration has denied. Certainly going back to January of 2014 when President Obama referred to ISIS as a JV team, it kind of shows you the attitude that President Obama would like to take. Just doesn't really want to face the reality. But the bottom line is the war on terror is not over. Islamic terrorists are not on the run in terms of going into hiding. The threat is metastasized around the world, and we're seeing it carried out in the streets of Western capitals, Paris, Ottawa, Sydney, Fort Hood, Texas. I mean, let's face it, this is a problem that is growing, and we have to face that very hard reality.
Ron, as you were mentioning the president's initial characterization of ISIS as the JV team, we were looking at some footage from the Middle East, but obviously here at home, the concerns are heightened. TSA is increasing random checks, and they brought some other changes to their procedures at the airports. Can you tell us about some of the additional preventative measures that are being put in place?
Not with any kind of specificity, but let's face it, we definitely have hardened our defenses against terrorist attacks. I mean, we hardened the cockpits. We put in the TSA at a great deal of expense, by the way. I mean, that is what terrorists are trying to do. They're trying to disrupt our society, and unfortunately, they've had a great deal of success. So, one of the points I've been trying to make, JD, is take a look at the bigger picture here in terms of what do we really need to address this incredibly complex problem. And I will start out looking at ISIS, and the reason I started talking about that is the fact that they are not losing. That's all they really have to do to win. As long as they're not losing, they're perceived as winning, and as long as they're perceived around the world as winning, they are going to continue to inspire these types of attacks. They are very sophisticated in terms of their use of social media. Look at the way they just somebody affiliated with their group or certainly inspired by that group hacked into Central Command's Twitter account. What is far more troubling about that is just the sophistication of their communication strategy there to continue to inspire this type of activity. So from my standpoint, the number one goal of U.S. policy right now to begin to contain this is we actually need to accomplish President Obama's stated goal against ISIS, is degrade and ultimately defeat ISIS. The sooner, the better. The problem is we have no plan in place for actually defeating them. I'm afraid right now all the president is doing is somewhat containing them.
Ron, in the minute and a half that remains in this segment, we understand, and there's an article on our parent website, newsmax.com, detailing linked documents saying border agents now have little authority to detain or arrest illegal immigrants. And against that backdrop, your colleague, Jeff Sessions of Alabama, reportedly has said in a memo that not a single dime will go to fund the president's unilateral immigration actions. Do you believe that promise can be upheld?
It might be difficult. I mean, the president obviously has got a great deal of discretion with spending. Remember during the last government shutdown, a very small portion of DHS actually shut down. I think 13.6% of DHS personnel were furloughed. Now, JD, quite honestly, that's a good thing. With the dysfunction here in Washington, D.C., the last thing you want is to have our security apparatus shut down when we can't get our act together here. But listen, I'm on board with Senator Sessions from a standpoint that this president continues to act unilaterally without the constitutional and legal authority. And here's the worst part of his executive amnesty. It's going to increase the pressure at the border. It's going to increase the incentives for people to come into our country illegally, makes it that much more difficult for our Border Patrol agents to secure the border. And from my standpoint, the number one most effective response Congress can have to President Obama's unilateral action is we need to obviously highlight the unconstitutionality of those acts. we need to pass a strong border security and immigration
and
enforcement
mindful of
bill.
that, Ron, we're going to come back and talk to you to see if the president will sign Homeland Security funding if it doesn't include his amnesty. We'll talk about that and more with Ron Johnson. Let's continue our conversation now with Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson, the new chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee. Ron, we've heard a lot of veto threats from this White House, and there's a new one out there that President Obama would veto Homeland Security funding unless it includes his executive amnesty. Do you really believe he would give priority to non-citizens over the protection of our homeland?
Yes. I mean, JD, here's the reality situation is, President Obama is going to play the political game with immigration. I mean, let's face it, if he was truly interested in solving the immigration problem, as he promised as a candidate, he would have passed his version of immigration reform in the first 2 years when he had a filibuster-proof Senate, when he totally controlled Washington. He didn't do that. He has used immigration as a political football, basically holding border security hostage, for his political benefit. And it's a real shame. So, bottom line, President Obama is going to feel quite confident that, he can veto any kind of funding bill for DHS, but he'll still use discretionary funds. I mean, in the end, it's the administration that controls what are termed essential personnel. Like I said, last time the government shut down, only 13.6% of DHS personnel were furloughed. The rest of the people did continue their function, keeping this nation safe. And with Washington being so dysfunctional, I'm saying that's not necessarily a bad thing. I want to make sure that America remains safe. But, President Obama, immigration reform for him is simply a political weapon. And it's very unfortunate because it's really hampering Americans' ability to get good-paying jobs. I mean, this broken immigration system we have is harmful to our economy. It hurts real Americans, and it puts at risk our national security.
Well, mindful of that fact, some say there's an ongoing campaign. There's at least a battle of ideas. Will you and your Republican colleagues fight this strenuously and say, Mr. President, look, the priority has to be true Homeland Security, not your executive amnesty?
Yes, I mean, we already have some pretty strong measures battling back, specifically targeting, defunding President Obama's executive amnesty, his unlawful executive actions. But again, we really have limited power of the purse. I know people talk about it all the time, but only 1/3 of the federal budget, $3.5, $3.6 trillion budget, is appropriated. Of that 1/3, roughly $1.1 trillion, half of that is defense. 85% of Department of Homeland Security budget gets spent whether it's appropriated or not. So, the level of control that Congress can really impose on the president is limited, and what branch of government has not been involved in these separation of power disputes is the judiciary. We have the states taking the president to court. I think that's a good thing, but unfortunately our legal system, the wheels of justice turn quite slowly. So we just need to continue to highlight and do everything we can to rein in this executive.
Well, speaking of the executive, Dick Morris appeared on this program yesterday, and he talked about this current president's sense of disengagement in some areas and just attitudinally where our current commander-in-chief is. Let's listen to Mr. Morris, and we'll get your reaction, Senator.
For Obama not to have gone and not to have sent anyone is outrageous, and it shows that this basically is a get lost, I got elected last time I ran, the congressional elections are over, don't bother me presidency.
Dick Morris, of course, referring to last weekend in Paris and the failure of top American officials to show up there. But this notion that he is acting in imperial fashion, don't bother me, the elections are over, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I dare you to stop me, I don't think you have the tools to do so. It presents a fairly stark choice to those of you in the Senate, and especially in your position, tasked as you are with overseeing Homeland Security.
JD, I come from the business world, so I did a lot of negotiating, developed a lot of relationships with suppliers and customers. I'd always start those negotiations or relationships trying to figure out everything we agreed on, not picking a fight right off the bat, but that's exactly how President Obama has certainly started his relationship with this new Congress, picking a fight. And this is in the face of people like myself being very public in our desire to work with this administration, finding the areas of agreement on regulatory reform, making a commitment to DH Secretary Jay Johnson to help him succeed in his mission of keeping this country safe. So, our outreach has really been just met with threats of veto and this president acting unilaterally and trying to pick fights with us. It's very unfortunate. It is an arrogance of power that has to be reined in.
Ron Johnson, as you bring your principles for business to government, as you've done that in the Senate and now take over the chairmanship of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee there in what has been called the world's most exclusive club. We know it better as the United States Senate. Sir, we thank you for your time. We look forward to having you back here again on America's Forum.
Have a great day, JD.
There's Ron Johnson. Coming up, Pete Hoekstra on the CENTCOM computer hack job. That's next on America's Forum.